When you look at his speech as prepared for delivery, and you compare it to what he spoke or misspoke, honor instead of horror, ending instead of enduring, he is not in the best of shapes and may not be presentable for the electorate coming 2024.
I want to bring back our panel now. Professor Yossi Yona, former Israeli parliament member, Amir Oren, a defense and government commentator, and joining us for this block, Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, the former Israeli ambassador to the United States and an expert on U.S.-Israeli relations in the Middle East. Thank you so much.
Thank you, but I was not the ambassador. I was an ambassador in charge of congressional relations.
An ambassador in charge of congressional relations. Well, thank you for the correction. I want to ask you about, we were speaking briefly before the break about this declaration in Jerusalem, and now your take on what you think it can bring.
Well, I think this declaration could be a screensaver, nothing more than that, unless it entails a dramatic change in U.S. policy towards Iran. All the commitments to make sure that Iran does not get nuclear ignores the fact that conventional Iran is a lethal, clear and present danger to every single pro-American Arab regime in the Middle East. In fact, it's a clear and present danger to the U.S. mainland itself through the Ayatollah's activities in Central America and South America. There should be a change, a rethinking of American policy towards Iran. For the last 43 years, since the Ayatollahs took over, the Americans have stuck to the diplomatic option, which has been the best thing that the Ayatollahs could have dreamed about, undermining the interest of every single pro-American Arab country in the Middle East, undermining America's own national security interests. It's time to reassess this diplomatic option and introduce another option. When you deal with a rogue regime by removing the military club from above the head of that regime, there is no prayer for a successful diplomatic option. There must be above the head of the Ayatollahs the regime change option and the military option, if that agreement, which will be or has been signed, will be more than just mere screensaver.
Well, I think this is a good transition into our next topic, which is possible normalization with Saudi Arabia. And it seems like the U.S. is here to broker that deal. And it seems almost as though Iran, with its nuclear capabilities and expansion, seems to be the unifier for this. And Israel also interested in giving Saudi Arabia the Iron Beam defense system. So we'll start with you. What do you think can happen from this?
So this entire trip is not intended to launch anything new. It's stock taking. It's a reflection of what has been happening up to now, freeze frame, if we speak in television or photography terms, rather than the launching of a new initiative. And yes, Iran has been the common denominator, the common danger, but also because if Iran really goes militarily nuclear, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Turkey, and Egypt are also certain to go down that route. There is a common interest on the part of Israel, the United States, and everyone else to stop the Iranian nuclear effort. And the best or the least worst effort up to now has been Obama's 2015 agreement, which Ambassador Ettinger is so vehemently opposed to. And apparently, under President Trump, the danger has been exacerbated. And President Biden is on the right track in trying to revive the agreement with certain fixes And most of the Israeli national security mechanism, establishment, rather than the politicians, Lapid, Bennett, and the others, are afraid of Benjamin Netanyahu. Defense Minister Gantz is more nuanced. He has been willing to accept this new deal. This would seem to be in Israel's best interest, even if many politicians are afraid to say so right now.
Professor, I want to get your take, but I want you to listen to this soundbite of the U.S. president speaking with Channel 12's Yonit Levy about the Iranian threat. Take a listen to what he says.
I think it was a gigantic mistake for the last president to get out of the deal. They're closer to a nuclear weapon now than they were before. It doesn't have anything to do with whether or not the Quds Force is going to stop or they're going to continue to be engaged in activities. We can act against them and still have a deal where they curtail their nuclear program. And so I still think it makes sense. We've laid out on the table, we've made the deal, we've offered it, and it's up to Iran now.
Are you committed to keep the IRGC on the foreign terrorist organization list, even if that means that kills the deal?
Yes.
You, in the past, said you'll do anything, and you say it again, that you'll ensure Iran would not acquire nuclear weapons. Does that also mean, sir, that you would use force against Iran? Is that what that means? If needed?
That was the last resort, yes.
So the U.S. president very clearly stating there that he would use force against Iran as a last resort. Give us your take.
Well, it's last resort. I mean, there is the position, and my friend here, Yoram, is actually expressing that not in terms of political analysis of what should be done. And I'm not getting into that, you know, of what should be done, but I would like to talk about what likely to be done. So, of course, this position, let's call it that way, Carthago delinda est. This is the old Senator Cato was saying that Carthago must be destroyed. And this is the position that is being actually expressed here. And this is what actually Netanyahu was whispering into Biden's ear in the airport. Carthago must be destroyed. But I don't think that the Americans are willing to do that. They would not go that track. Of course, as you just mentioned, as President Biden just said, well, we are committed that Iran would not possess nuclear weapons. But at the same time, he remains committed to reaching an agreement. Now, of course, there can be some kind of fixes, as Amir was saying. You know, there are three issues. The ballistic missile, the meddling in regional conflicts by Iran, and revolutionary guards. So would America would be willing to include these issues into the agreement? I don't know. Yes, about the revolutionary guards, there is a commitment made by Biden saying, well, that the revolutionary guard would still be part of the how to describe it, not propitious or admirable list of terrorist organization. That might be a concession that the American administration is willing to make vis-a-vis Israel. But vis-a-vis the other issues, I don't think that it would be included. It's not what I'm desiring. It is, but you know, but this is what I think, as a matter of fact, that these issues would not be included. America is actually desiring, wanting to reach an agreement because, hey, that we're talking about vacillating circumstances, vacillating interest, and it might be very interesting if I want to add some kind of insight. Look at that. Putin and Israel are against the agreement, and this is, some people say that that is the reason for Putin's trip to Iran, convincing them not to accept the agreement. Why? Because there is the issue of oil. As long as there's no agreement with Iran, the prices of oil are, you know, going up. Prices of oil produced by Russia. This is very interesting that there is this kind of alliance now between Israel and Russia vis-a-vis Iran, though Russia is to be considered as an ally to Iranian regime. So we're seeing here, as I was saying, kind of vacillating circumstantial interest that actually changing the whole, you know, that we have to reconsider this map of changing vacillating interest in the Middle East. So we are in the middle of some kind kind of a turmoil. And so we don't have a very clear picture as what's going to happen in the next few months.
So how worrisome is it for both Israel and the United States that Putin is going to Iran next week, but also to meet with the Turkish president? What kind of alliance could they possibly form there that would be worrisome?
What I've heard is that there is some kind of attempts on the part of Russia, Turkey, and Iran to forge some kind of a counter-hegemonic settlement here in the Middle East. Is this to our interest? No, of course it is not to our interest. But this is what actually is going to happen, and we've got to Israel has got to consider what's going to what is role in that. Now, what we are hearing is this is the boons that the American president willing to pay Israel and other threatened countries, and mainly the Gulf countries, that we're going to increase the kind of defense alliance between us and the regional countries against this kind of mounting Iranian threat to the stability in the Middle East.
Your take.
Yeah, it seems to me that the closer relations between Russia, Iran, and Turkey, just like the drift by the Saudis and the Emiratis towards China and towards Russia, even in the area of military acquisitions, is a testimony to the dramatic erosion in the U.S. posture of deterrence, which is the direct result of the U.S. ignoring the Ayatollah's reality, the Middle East reality, and sticking to the diplomatic option, which, as far as the Saudis are concerned, is a very, very lethal threat to them. President Biden will go to Jeddah. He will try to recoup the eroded posture of deterrence, but he has a problem. As long as he demonstrates eagerness, which he has done, for another agreement with Iran, he is not going to be able to restore America's posture of deterrence. And here, there's also a comment which I would like to add. When we talk about President Biden, it's not America. The American political system accords the legislature co-equal, co-determining power also in the area of national security and defense. And the fact is that since at least February of this year, the Democratic chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Robert Menendez, is a very outspoken critic of Biden's policy on Iran. He delivered a floor speech of over 1 hour, tearing apart, literally tearing apart, the whole diplomatic approach towards Iran, and he's not the only one among the Democrats.
I'm just going to get Amir in here.
The president is the commander-in-chief, and while Yoram and others here in the panel have a long experience on Capitol Hill, nevertheless, it is not for foreigners, Israelis included, to push the Americans towards another military adventure. There is no domestic support for American GIs shedding blood in Arabia or in Iran. The American military, especially the U.S. Army, is a paper tiger now. Youngsters do not want to join the military. Biden knows it full well. He is not going to threaten and then not be able to make real his threat. So his priorities are defense, diplomacy, deterrence, and only if all that fails, defeat and destroy.
We're going to cross now to our correspondent, but we'll be right back with you, panel. Our diplomatic correspondent, Mary McCullough, live for us at the Waldorf Astoria, where President Biden and Prime Minister Yair Lapid will be meeting. Mary, talk to us about what you're seeing. When can we expect the two leaders?
Hi, Hamza. Yes, so we do know that President Biden has arrived here at the Waldorf Astoria, and he is now beginning that meeting with Israel's Prime Minister Yair Lapid. They are expected to meet one-on-one, just the two of them, where they are discussing a number of different agreements that's being signed. But most importantly is this Jerusalem declaration that we are expected to be signed when they deliver statements to the media later today. You can see behind me the table right behind where we are expecting this declaration to be officially signed. It's supposed to include a number of different tenets. The most important, of course, reaffirming the commitment from both sides, from both Israel and the U.S., to defend the other's strategic cooperation, to try and push through this strategic cooperation in a number of ways, as well as a number of issues that have to do not just between the U.S. and Israel, but more issues on the global stage. So this includes, one, Russia's war in Ukraine. They are expected to speak on this matter, to deliver statements on this matter, to include some kind of text in this declaration talking about their support for the Ukrainian people in the defense of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But we're also expecting to hear some kind of text coming out about the Iranian nuclear weapons and a commitment from both sides to see the other, to take stances against and to try and do what they can to prevent Iran from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon. This is one of the major new things that we are expected to be hearing in this agreement and putting on paper this agreement to stand together when it comes to the Iranian nuclear program.
Diplomatic correspondent Mary McCullough live for us in Jerusalem. Thank you. All right, let's bring back in our panel. Professor, I'll give you the last word on Iran.
Yeah, just I wanted to add, to what our friend here is saying. I think gone are the days that Israel would be able to nudge America into kind of military involvement in the area. And just say, like the memories are still fresh as part of Americans' goals. The fiasco in Iraq and Afghanistan. There is no political will. There's no real domestic support within American society to launch a new war against Iran, to topple the Ayatollah's regime. I think that, and I'm saying that it is for us as Israeli, or even Israeli government, to be realistic about that. And the moment that we'll be realistic about that, we've got to think about more realistic options, how to manage our affairs in the Middle East. No, America is not going to go into war against Iran. No, America is not going to topple the Ayatollah's regime. What we've got to concentrate on deterrence. This is the main thing, and this is what I think what the American administration is offering us: deterrence, increasing the deterrence capability, preventing Iran from either developing its nuclear capabilities and curbing its interference and domestic conflicts.
Amir, I want to direct this next question to you, then we'll open it up to the panel about Joe Biden's popularity in the United States back on the home front. We're seeing inflation at its highest in 40 years, 9.1%, 33% approval rating, 64% of Democrats, people in his own party, would like a different candidate for 2024. This trip to Israel, can it bring him any popularity in general? Do Americans even care that he's here?
No, they don't. It's summertime and the living is easy, fish are jumping and all of that. Who cares about such a trip? Not even in France, where it's Bastille Day, do they care. And we have to wait for the midterm elections a week after the elections in Israel. Always on Tuesdays, of course, November 1st here, November 8th, to see whether Biden has any chance of survival towards 2024. But one interesting finding in the latest New York Times poll is that both Biden and Trump are not popular. Approximately half of the electorate would like to see another candidate on either party. And nevertheless, Biden beats Trump 44-41. Biden is not in good shape. Even yesterday at the airport, granted after a long trip, a very hot day, having to see all of the Israeli politicians, that's quite a burden. When you look at his speech as prepared for delivery, and you compare it to what he spoke or misspoke, honor instead of horror, ending instead of enduring, he is not in the best of shapes and may not be presentable for the electorate coming 2024. And because of that, one has to caution regarding Yonit Levy's interview. In the small segment that you showed, there was a contradiction between two of his responses. He said that the United States can act against the Quds force, which is part of the IRGC, not its entirety, regardless of what happens nominally. And then the next question had to do with keeping the IRGC on the list, and he said yes. It was not a pre-planned policy statement, I am going to keep it on the list, but an offhand reply, which on reflection may not stand. So one has to be very cautious about extrapolating his one-syllable response and make it a policy. He will keep the IRGC on the foreign terrorist organization list, which he says himself is not that important.
Your take.
Well, Biden's domestic posture is very relevant to Israel. Mm-hmm. It's relevant to Israel because if, and I'm not sure, but if there is an intent by Secretary Blinken, who is the chief policy maker behind Biden's national security and foreign policy, if there is any intent to put pressure on Israel, Biden is in no position to pressure Israel. If Israel resists that pressure, whether it is on Jerusalem, Palestinian issue at large, Iran, or whatever. The other point which is relevant to Israel is that if election were held tomorrow, and I'm not sure that reality in November would be like tomorrow, but if it were to be held tomorrow, there is a possibility that the defeat by the Democrats in the House, in the Senate, gubernatorial races, state legislatures, would be the worst since Second World War. That would change majority from Democrats to Republicans, which means that the pro-Israel sentiments on Capitol Hill would be dramatically enhanced, which would open many, many opportunities for enhanced U.S.-Israel relations, including on the issue of Iran.
Professor Yossi.
Yeah, well, it is very, for me, it's kind of paradoxical thing. You know, I do agree with you that Biden is not going to put pressure on Israel to move ahead with vis-a-vis the issue, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But the real question whether it is good or not good for us. That reminds me, at the time, the statement by James Baker, who was the national security to Reagan, and he was saying, to Bush, and he was saying, well, look, guys, we're not going to put pressure on you. If you want to go on bleeding, go on bleeding. This is our phone numbers. If you change your mind, please call us. We would be at your service. So the thing is, it is not whether America is going to put pressure on Israel or not. The issue is ours. The problem is ours. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is our problem. It's not an American problem. So, well, if Israel is not willing to move on and to look at some kind of solutions, well, the Americans would say, well, you are our friends. You know, just we're not going to break friendship with you. We're not going to put pressure with you, but this is going to be your problem. So the problem remains, irrespective of whether it would be a pressure or would not be a pressure. And this is the tragedy. This is the tragedy. If there is no, it is no kind of a progress towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that what it means. That we're going to be back down with another violent circles, another bloodshed between us and the Palestinians. Who does these kind of scenarios serve? Whom does it serve?
Chanda, you know, television focuses on the sights and sounds of the moment, and we're waiting to see the two leaders address us, microphones, cameras, and all of that. But 61 years ago already, in another world of Astoria in New York, President Kennedy met Prime Minister Ben-Gurion. And then we saw Johnson with Eshkol at the LBJ Ranch in Texas, and Nixon and Golda in the White House, and Reagan and Shamir. And by the way, in November of 1983, Shamir the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, along with Ahrens, the Defense Minister, got a very, very good strategic cooperation agreement from Reagan. And then during your time, Bush and Shamir, and then we saw Clinton and Rabin and all of the rest. There is nothing new that we are going to hear regarding an alliance, partnership, regional cooperation that we haven't heard before. The proof is in the pudding.
Well, all certainly very interesting indeed. We'll see what happens in the midterm elections in the United States in 2020. It was quite a crowded field of Democratic candidates. We'll see if any of them step up to the plate to replace Joe Biden. We're going to take a short break now.
When you look at his speech as prepared for delivery and you compare it to what he spoke or misspoke, honor instead of horror, ending instead of enduring. He is not in the best of shapes and may not be presentable for the electorate coming 2024.